Scientists referred to the Shroud of Turin as a medieval hoax for more than 600 years. It appeared to be definitively proven by the carbon dating in 1988. However, everything changed in 2022. The cloth was examined by new AI technology in a way that had never been done before. The scientific community was rocked by what it discovered. Not alone were the old tests called into question by the results. The timeline was entirely reversed by them. The AI that made this discovery is now acting in a different way. Religious leaders are really concerned about this. A long linen cloth was brought to a little chapel in Lirey, France, in 1354 by a French knight by the name of Geoffrey de Charny. It wasn't just another relic, he said, but the same shroud that had been used to cover Jesus Christ upon his crucifixion. A dim, yellowish image of a man's front and back was displayed on the cloth, which was roughly 4.3 meters long and 1.2 meters broad. People were in disbelief. A few fell to their knees. Others questioned it right away because relics were common in medieval Europe. Churches were filled with holy items, saints' bones, and pieces of the true cross, many of which were blatant fakes that were being sold for money. Thus, the discussion started right away when this shroud showed up with a life-sized body inexplicably imprinted on the fabric. The thighs, causing the wrists to bear the entire weight of the body. That dispute blew up by 1389. Pierre Darcy, the Bishop of Troyes, had had enough. He formally complained to Pope Clement VII that the shroud was a fake and that the person who painted it had even admitted to doing so. In private, he knew it was a scam, but he accused the churchman at Lirey of presenting it to travelers just to profit. Although the Pope did not label it authentic, he also did not forbid it. He permitted it to be displayed as a symbol rather than a relic, something to bolster faith rather than validate history. However, the fascination persisted despite that. The shroud was purchased by the influential House of Savoy in 1453 and relocated to their chapel at Chambéry. Then catastrophe struck. The chapel caught fire on a chilly night in 1532. The folded linen was dripping with molten silver from the reliquary, which burned through multiple layers. The material was severely scarred, but it survived. Even now, the water stains and symmetrical burn marks remain discernible. The Savoys relocated it once more in 1578, this time to Turin, Italy, where it remained for several centuries. Umberto II, the last Italian king and the shroud's last owner, bequeathed it to the Vatican in his testament in 1983. However, he himself never asserted that it was genuine. Without requiring the Catholic Church to formally declare it authentic, he passed it on. Thus, without affirming or refuting, the Church maintained what some refer to as holy suspense, enabling it to continue serving as a metaphor for Christ's suffering without ever claiming its veracity. The shroud's trip contains some almost unbelievable moments. Marguerite, the granddaughter of Geoffrey de Charny, stole the shroud in 1418 amid the turmoil of the 100 Years' War and would not return it. Eventually, she sold it to the Savoys in return for 2 castles after touring with it and displaying it for cash. For it, she was excommunicated. An idea from the 1300s that said the image might have been created from a real crucified body is even more disturbing. It was even rumored that the final Grandmaster of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, was tortured in 1307. In a manner that reflected Christ's wounds. Some people think that in order to create the spooky image that we still see today, his body may have been wrapped in cloth that was broken and burnt. Whether or not that anecdote is accurate, it illustrates the lengths people may have gone to, either out of dedication or dishonesty, in order to produce something that had a spiritual impact. The mystery grew more complex centuries later. The first official photographs of the shroud were taken in 1898 by Secondo Pia, an Italian photographer. His palms trembled at what he saw on the negatives. Suddenly, the dim image on the cloth came into focus, revealing a man's face and torso in eerie clarity. Like a sculpture illuminated from within, it appeared three-dimensional. Everything altered as a result. Scientists started using contemporary technologies to examine the image. Computers discovered in the 1970s that the darkness of each area of the picture corresponded to the separation between the fabric and a fictitious body, indicating that the cloth somehow recorded depth information. This was more than just a painting, it was a shape encoder. Then the injuries appeared. More than 100 marks that resembled scourge wounds were counted by the researchers. Roman whip-like lesions in the shape of dumbbells. They were topped with metal balls. Similar to how Jesus was flogged in the Gospels, they showed up on the back, chest, and legs. These scars even shone under UV light, like the halo pattern left by dried serum when it clots and leaks, just like real blood does. With a swollen cheek and what appeared to be a broken nose, the man's face appeared ravaged. In normal light, these features were not discernible to the unaided eye. However, what no painter of the 1300s could ever see, the camera and computers saw. Even those who doubted it acknowledged that, if it was a fake, it was a masterpiece. If this is a counterfeit, it's a pretty great one, according to a famous historian. Because it appeared to be more than simply a man. It appeared to be a guy who had endured suffering that was painfully detailed in the account of his crucifixion. And it retained those clues in a weird medium that the Shroud refuses to reveal its secret despite all the research we've tried. The Shroud was silent for generations, concealed by myth and glass. But in 1978, everything was different. A group of scientists traveled to Turin by plane that year. The Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, was a group of forensic specialists, physicists, and chemists. They conducted every test they could think of for 5 entire days without causing any harm to the linen. They took fiber samples, scanned it with ultraviolet light, X-rayed it, and looked at it under a microscope. Even the doubters were taken aback by their findings. Their report was eventually published in 1981. They claimed that the image on the fabric was neither dyed, painted, or sketched. None of the pigments, brushstrokes, or binding agents found in paint. Instead, they discovered something far more bizarre. They were unable to explain how the fibers themselves had been burnt in a pattern like a man. They put up theories. None of them could adequately explain how a three-dimensional image wound up burned into old linen with such precision, but it might have been a chemical reaction or a radiation burst. And it was actual blood. The body's wounds were lined with bloodstains. Forehead, feet, side, and wrists. It wasn't merely haphazard splashes. Anatomically, it was logical. Everything fit the crucifixion story. Even more bluntly, one of the scientists stated that the Shroud is a mystery. However, 1988 arrived. A tiny fragment of the Shroud was removed and transported to 3 distinct labs in Arizona, Zurich, and Oxford. The long-awaited test, carbon dating, was about to be conducted. The cloth would have been made around the time of Christ if the Shroud was authentic. Centuries of belief would crumble if it didn't. The labs completed their tasks. The findings were released in the journal Nature in 1989. According to them, the fabric was created between 1260 and 1390 AD. It's not ancient or from Jerusalem, it's medieval. The majority of scientists immediately deemed the case resolved. Newspapers everywhere declared that the Shroud was a hoax, a clever one, perhaps, but a fake nevertheless. However, not everybody agreed with that finding. There were issues. Statisticians observed that the dates produced by the 3 labs were oddly disparate. That must not occur. Something strange was revealed when the raw data was eventually made public. An older date was provided by one end of the tested strip than the other. That also shouldn't occur. Every small piece of cloth should test the same if it was from the same era. This suggested that the sample may have included both fresh and old threads. As it happens, they didn't just cut the sample from any region of the Shroud. It came from an area that had been burned down in 1532. They had fixed that place. Centuries after the Shroud was originally created, experts surmised that nuns had rewoven that corner using more modern thread. Joe Marino and Sue Benford, 2 scholars, contended that Renaissance weavers might covertly reweave ancient linen with more modern cotton and then dye it to match. That would account for the younger-than-expected results of the carbon dating. Ray Rogers, a member of the original STURP team who initially rejected the reweave notion, then received fresh thread samples from the same corner in 2005. He saw exactly what Benford and Moreno had said under the microscope. Old linen is made with modern material and dyed cotton threads. Crucially, it was entirely distinct from the remaining fabric. The date the labs discovered wouldn't have revealed anything about the shroud's true age if they had tested that portion that had been restored. Rogers reached a startling realization. The carbon dating was not reliable. The shroud had not been dated. A medieval repair was dated. Despite the skepticism of many in the scientific community, the inquiries continued. Researchers in the UK were compelled to make all of the raw carbon dating data public in 2017 due to a court order. By 2019, a fresh statistical analysis validated the first hypotheses. The information was not consistent. It wasn't trustworthy. Thus, the mystery's door was once more open. Other hints had already begun to accumulate. Max Frey, a Swiss criminologist, gathered small particles from the shroud by applying sticky tape across it in the 1970s. Botanists carried on his work after his passing. They had discovered 58 distinct kinds of pollen by the late 1990s. Many of the plants, which were exclusive to Jerusalem, the Dead Sea, and Sinai, came from the Middle East rather than merely France or Italy. Zygophyllum domosum is one among them. It grows only in Israel, Jordan, and some areas of Egypt. Its pollen was discovered on the shroud, along with remains of its blossom. Pollen can travel and adhere to clothing or containers, according to critics, but the pattern was too precise. There were several different types of foreign grains, not just one or two, and they all pointed to ancient Judea. There were also other odd discoveries. A physician by the name of Alan Wanger examined the shroud in 1995 using image enhancement software. He said he could make out delicate flower outlines and even coin patterns close to the eyes. According to him, the markings looked like Pontius Pilate-era Roman coins. This was not universally accepted. Some believed it to be an artifact or a figment of their imagination, yet the concept persisted. Its lengthy voyage may be traced in the shroud. Then came 2002. Professional restoration was done on the shroud. The backing material was changed, old patches were taken out, and damaged edges were trimmed. New portions of the fabric were made available to scientists as a result. Something caught their attention. The cloth's bloodstains didn't appear to be random. They adhered to trauma, anatomy, and gravity. Blood had seeped down the arm from the wrists. The lower back was where it had gathered. Where the nails would have been, there were puncture marks on the feet and wrists. What's more interesting is that the thumbs were hidden. Nails pierced through the wrists during Roman crucifixions can harm the median nerve, causing the thumbs to contract. The cloak reveals that. And it's unlikely that any medieval artist would have been aware of that. A comprehensive investigation was released in 2005 by Dr. Pierluigi Bema Bologna, an Italian medical examiner. Determined that the injuries were typical of a guy who had been crucified, with his arms extended, his body strained, and blood pouring as it would have after such a death. The picture was not in keeping with the prevalent Jesus artwork of the Middle Ages. It was consistent with what is known about Roman execution from archaeology and current medicine. Something unexpected occurred in 2022. That challenged all of our preconceived notions regarding the Shroud of Turin. Under the direction of Dr. Liberato De Caro, a group of Italian scientists made the decision to abandon conventional wisdom and attempt something entirely new. As opposed to the 1988 test, which included carbon dating, they employed a technique that was non-existent at the time. Wide-angle X-ray scattering was the term for it. The topic of radioactive decay was not examined. It examined the fiber's own structural makeup. Way the X-rays reflected off the linen's interior layers, revealing how the material had changed over time. And everything altered as a result. These scientists weren't merely speculating. They used old textiles whose ages were already known to create a curve and a timeline. They made use of authentic items from actual eras, such as Roman-era textiles from the Siege of Masada in AD 73. 8 minuscule samples, which are almost perceptible to the human eye, were then extracted from the shroud. They were astounded by what they witnessed. The designs were similar to those in 1st century linen, which dates from between 55 and 74 AD, not the 1200s or 1300s. Because that wasn't simply old, that was enough to draw notice. Jesus was alive at that time. The period coincided with the decades that many people think the crucifixion took place. All of a sudden, it seemed less certain that the shroud was a medieval fabrication. And there was more. The same corner that was used in 1988 was not used for these samples. It had always been a contentious aspect of the fabric. Some others thought the results would have been skewed because it had been renovated during the Middle Ages. However, the threads came from cleaner places this time. Original linen, no cotton or dye. This meant that rather than a patched-up part from centuries later, the readings were more likely to represent the fabric's genuine age. However, there were still inquiries. Compared to carbon dating, wax dating is less well known. It is based on determining how the fibers mature under typical circumstances. The scientists concluded that the cloth had lived its entire life in calm, dry locations that weren't overly hot or humid, namely churches and reliquaries in Europe. It had even withstood smoke and fire. Additionally, it has been sealed in a climate-controlled enclosure with argon gas at a temperature of about 19 or 20 degrees Celsius since 1998. This was significant since the fabric might have aged more quickly if it had been kept in a warmer or wetter environment. However, the researchers maintained that their hypotheses were reasonable. They had examined the exact history of storage for the shroud. That was something they had considered. According to Dr. DeCaro, the findings were entirely consistent with the shroud's 2,000-year age. He even claimed that the sample they used wasn't representative and that the 1988 carbon dating was most likely incorrect. During interviews, he was candid. He demanded that radiocarbon testing be done again, using several samples from various areas of the fabric this time. He wanted to check if the outcomes will match the wax data, not just one corner. It would be compelling evidence if they did. Otherwise, the discussion would go on. Individuals responded differently. For some, it was evidence. Others exercised greater caution. Wax was brand new. Only a few threads were evaluated by the team, and some experts cautioned that factors like germs or prior damage could distort the findings. Others noted that there is some degree of uncertainty associated with all dating techniques. Although there is a margin of error in even carbon dating, the researchers were optimistic. They had examined known samples. They had made use of linen from historical occurrences that had been confirmed. The readings from the shrouds were not limited to the old range. They were distinct from medieval attire. The crystallinity of the earlier textiles was higher. More time had gone by, more collapse. The shroud also revealed that the study didn't take off right away after it was published in the journal Heritage in 2022. However, by 2023 and 2024, people started to take notice. It appeared in historical publications, Christian websites, and science news. For some, it marked a sea change. Some referred to it as only another theory. However, the facts were in. The tests were authentic. The outcomes were noted. And the argument had changed for the first time in decades. Another group used a completely different tack while researchers were still attempting to determine how the image on the Shroud of Turin was even made in the first place. They attempted to use contemporary means to reinvent the enigma rather than solve it. Artificial intelligence tools such as Midjourney, DALL-E, and Stable Dissemination gained tremendous power between 2023 and 2024. Thus, interested painters and shroud researchers came up with an idea. What if people could request that AI reveal the true face hidden behind the mask? If you could transform that faded image into a human being with lifelike features, how would Jesus appear? The UK's Daily Express made an attempt at such in April 2024. They created a human face using Midjourney using high-resolution pictures of the shroud. They may have also included descriptions of the hair, bruises, and crown of thorns. The outcome was uncanny and eerie. With his long, wavy hair that reached his shoulders, his full beard, and his weary, dejected eyes, it appeared to be a man in his 30s. The face wasn't created at random. In fact, you could see swelling around the nose and what appeared to be little incisions on the cheek, as well as the subtle puncture marks on the forehead. The lash marks, blood trails, and indications of agony were all elements taken straight from the shroud. many believed that the shroud had at last been transformed into a genuine person. This picture was dubbed the true face of Jesus by the publication. They didn't do it subtly. This AI design felt more than just a guess until further research revealed that the fabric actually dated back to Jesus' time. Soon after, others joined in. Another British newspaper, The Sun, created its own version using GenCraft AI. Jesus had a gentle, worn-out appearance and hazel eyes, as if he had endured a lifetime of suffering. A gentle expression and obvious circles beneath the eyes were present. It was even referred to in the article as the visage of a weary Savior. Many claimed that this was an error, however, some versions of the photograph also had clothing. The shrouded man had been buried nude. They claimed that adding tunics or robes transformed it into fantasy. Things then took a turn for the worst. The face was animated by producers on TikTok and YouTube. They added delicate head rotations, little movements, and blinking eyes to make the still image come to life. The visage in one widely shared video truly spoke. In Aramaic, it said the Lord's Prayer. After being posted by the newspaper Marca, that specific video, which originated from a Spanish channel, amassed millions of views in a matter of days. People were unable to turn away. It was deemed lovely by some. Others claimed that it felt incorrect. Because it appeared as though Jesus was resurrected while being merely an AI animation, some even used the phrase blasphemous and conversing. These pictures went viral on social media with remarks such, "This is how Jesus actually looked." Additionally, AI makes the shroud come to life. Because the photographs were based on what many people believed to be Jesus' genuine burial garment, the Hindustan Times dubbed them one of the most striking glances of his potential face. However, how does any of this operate? How can artificial intelligence transform a dusty image into a human face? A clear, front-facing image of a man is provided by the shroud. It is pale and flat, but it has outlines. The size of the face, the beard's shape, and even the nose are all visible. AI can start to fill in the rest based on that. These picture generators were trained on billions of images, many of which were historical paintings of Jesus or religious art. The AI combines those patterns with its facial recognition knowledge when you feed the shroud into the system. It makes an educated guess as to the appearance of healthy skin. It brings in more light. It creates depth. It's not a random outcome. It combines data, reasoning, and creativity. Another twist. The Daily Express crew claimed that they used more than one flat image. They included the shroud's 3D data. This is due to the fact that there are subtle hints regarding distance in the material. Oh, you can measure the elevated facial features, such as the cheekbones and nose, if you scan it correctly. That was also used by the AI. As a result, the animation had a crooked nose and a bloated cheek on one side, which resembled the wounds and bruises on the actual shroud. These small details gave the picture a more authentic sense. It didn't feel like a wild guess to those who have studied the shroud for years. It seemed uncannily true. Like a digital artist, the AI refined the lines, filled in the blanks with color, and cleaned up the blurry areas. It substituted warm olive-colored flesh for the sepia tones of the fabric. The bloodstains become flaming red. The hair turned a gentle shade of brown. In certain iterations, the body's wounds even obeyed gravity's laws. If a guy had been hanging on a cross, the blood would have trickled down in that way. These were more than just lovely photos. In order to match the shroud detail for detail, they were examined, revised, processed, and designed. While not everyone was happy, some were eager to see what AI could accomplish with old artifacts. In fact, it felt like a red line had been crossed for many Christians the instant those artificial intelligence-generated images of Jesus began to circulate. The image touched something sacred, not merely because it was incorrect or odd. If you believe in it, the Shroud of Turin is more than just a piece of fabric. It's a miracle. For centuries, people have claimed that it was not created by humans. It's intentionally enigmatic. What it can't describe is what gives it power. However, AI now enters the picture with its confident guesses. This produces a portrait in full color. All of a sudden, the sacred becomes commonplace. The mystery is reduced to pixels. And there is the beginning of the terror. Pope Francis issued a warning in 2015 that we were starting to treat technology as if it were a false god. As something we adore, not as a tool. Holy relics are now being transformed by AI into voiceovers, animations, and even talking avatars. It goes beyond simple disdain. Confusion is the issue. Something changes when a computer model of Jesus is created and people begin to pray to it or, worse, treat it as though it were Jesus. That is no longer art. Imitation masquerading as presence is that. Bishop Robert Barron, one of the most well-known voices in the contemporary church, has attempted to clarify the line. Yes, technology can help you learn about God, he says. It has the power to unite people. However, your connection with God should never be replaced by it. Because it takes work to be in a relationship. It is a sign of respect. Furthermore, a neural network is devoid of all of that. That AI face was not fashioned by prayer. That model was not trained by love. Data, not devotion, was used in its construction. Then the strangeness increased. People wanted more than just a picture of Jesus. They desired to speak with him. Thus, chatbots were created by developers. An app called Text with Jesus exists. You open it. A message is typed by you. And an AI that poses as Jesus responds. Scripture is cited. It gives you comfort. It even pardons your transgressions. The alarms really started to sound at that point. A confession was entered in by one tester. Your sins are forgiven, my child, but only God is able to pardon sins, the AI Jesus retorted. Furthermore, forgiveness must be administered by a priest through a sacrament in many Christian traditions. People may believe a chatbot if it says, "You're forgiven." But they would be mistaken. They would not simply be misinformed. They would be deceived spiritually.